Welcome, first of all, to selling design to bigger companies. Um, First of all, I want to explain why it's worth going through all the additional effort, and I won't beat about the bush, there is additional effort in selling to bigger firms. First of all, the value of the projects are significantly higher for the most part, and they're bigger, which means you need to sell fewer of them. Uh, the end result with that is you end up spending less time selling and more time actually being creative, more time working on your business rather than necessarily having to be out there selling, finding new leads, finding new prospects, pulling together proposals. And certainly if you're in an area of business where you're having to do requests for proposals, RFPs, huge amount of time can be saved by not having to do that too often. You also have fewer client relationships to manage. They might prove to be a little bit more complicated because you're dealing often with more people in a bigger organization. But generally, those relationships become easier to manage. You appoint a person who is going to work directly with you, ideally, or they will, I should say. Also, bigger clients tend to last longer. The statistics for small businesses are something like 5 out of every 10 small businesses will fail within 5 years. It does vary depending upon the nature of the business. The restaurant trade, it's higher than that. Franchise businesses, it's significantly lower than that. So selling to bigger businesses means that there's a greater chance that your clients will still be around in 3 to 5 years' time and still working with you. And because they're bigger companies, there's a high value in repeat business. It's not like you're working with a startup and let's say you create their website. Well, then you've got to wait 3 to 5 years before you do another one. You might do a little, few add-ons, few tweaks, few changes. But when you're working for a bigger organization, there's significant opportunity for more than one subsidiary, more than one division to be working with you at any one time. So how do we do this? So the first thing is we're going to analyze your existing client base, and this is where the handouts come in. So I hope you all have those printed. If you haven't, let me know, and at the end of the webinar, I'll be able to resend the link to you. Secondly, we need to look at exactly where it is you are making a difference to your clients. And this is slightly different to the way in which many small businesses look. I once came across a website for, it was actually for a web developer, web designer, and they said they made their sites look pretty. If you go into a bigger organization and say, we can make your site look pretty, they're just going to laugh at you. In fact, you probably won't even get that far. So you need to be very clear about what it is that you do for your clients. You need to be very focused. One of the things is that you need to develop expertise in specific areas. Now, it could be technical expertise. It could be the nature of the design that you do. For example, maybe you're an illustrator or a cartoonist. How can you apply that? How can you use that? And there are some very good examples where illustrators and cartoonists have been able to sell into the professional market, ironically enough. It could be a geographic target so that you really know the demographics of your hometown, in which case, how can you exploit those demographics to help bigger businesses in your area target their clients more successfully? You need to develop your expertise as well, which comes back to defining your contribution. It's wonderful to know what your contribution is, but how can you take it to the next level? And the next level and the next level. And by doing that, you suddenly find yourself in the position of being able to charge significantly more than you were beforehand. And one of the things this is going to involve is proactive selling. This isn't, I'm afraid, one of those situations where you can sit back and create your wonderful internet funnel and clients are going to line up. And in fact, I have yet to see internet funnels work on a business-to-business basis really effectively. They work very well with business to consumer, but not so well with business to business. So for those of you who don't know me, just a little bit about myself. I've been working as a business consultant and coach onwards for nearly 30 years now. I'm lucky enough to have clients across North America and into Europe. And amongst those clients, I have some multi-award winning design clients. As well as working as a coach and consultant, I'm also an entrepreneur, and I have my own businesses as well. So I'm not talking at this from a theoretical standpoint. I've been there, done that, and actually am doing that as we speak, in fact. So why is now a good time to be looking to sell to bigger companies? We're in August at the moment. It's a relatively quiet month for a lot of big companies. And so this is a great opportunity now to start looking at who would you like to be working with in September or October. It's a great opportunity to be doing the research, be doing the analysis to find out how you can help some of these companies. So that's one of the reasons as to why now. It's also really important that you don't just let clients arrive at your door and end up working with just anyone who comes in. You want to be proactive, and you want to target the kinds of clients you want to work with, not the kinds of clients you have to work with because you don't have any money, but the kind of clients you really want to work with. Part of this will help you strengthen your brand as well. You work with bigger companies, you become more high profile. Funny enough, you can start charging more. Working with bigger companies, for me, working with my clients, it's very much part of a sales strategy. We look at where we want to go, where we want to take the business, what you as owners want to take out of the business, and determine what it is we need to do to get there. And part of that, more often than not, is selling to bigger companies. It also allows for your personal and professional growth. You're not dealing with the same size of companies the whole time. You're dealing with a different level of professionalism in your client base as well. And this allows you to both develop personally as a designer, as a technician, as a business person. But it also, it really does give you additional professional opportunities. Big companies, I was asked, why is it, big companies look for fresh ideas? And often companies are stuck in a position of status quo. They don't want to take the risk of making change or recommending change internally in case it rocks the boat. But they want those new ideas, so they go and look externally for them. And as a designer, you are really very well placed to guide, and I say bigger companies rather than necessarily just big ones. We're not talking about working with Google or Nike necessarily. But if you look around in your local city, your local town, there will be bigger companies which will be looking for fresh ideas as to how they can promote their business, how they can market their business, how they can do digital marketing strategy, how they can use their website to drive business. And one of the things that working with big clients can do is lead to exponential growth. You can really grow very, very rapidly. One of my clients, we introduced the processes that I'm going to be taking you through, and his sales funnel when we started working together was quite a respectable $70,000. Within 4 months, we'd taken it up to $700,000, and that's primarily because he'd gone from doing projects that were 5, 6 to 10,000 at most, and suddenly he was looking at doing projects that were in the 50, 60,000 mark. So it's very, very possible to grow exponentially by selling to bigger companies. And again, really sort of to reiterate why, it's such a great opportunity for you to spend less time selling, less time doing research, less time hustling and hassling with many small clients. And that frees up your time, not only for you to manage your business, and often that means recruiting people in, bringing in either subcontractors or permanent staff, but it also gives you the opportunity to actually go home, not be working those 12, 14-hour days. So lots of good reasons as to why it's good to be working with bigger companies. Okay, so what does it take? It's going to require quite a lot of hard work, I'm afraid. But one thing I do know from working in the design industry primarily for the last 7 years is that you guys really aren't afraid of hard work. It's not an instant transformation. This isn't one of those, and I'm going to come back to the whole idea of setting up a sales funnel where you create half a dozen blog posts and people feed through into your mailing list and then you sell them X, Y, Z. It isn't like that. There is a time lag in this, and that time lag is because you're selling to bigger organizations. You've got to be decisive about it. You can't sit on the fence with this. You either do it or you don't do it. If you dabble, you'll find you're wasting a lot of time doing research, doing half-hearted phone calls, half-hearted meetings because you're not quite sure. So be decisive. And it will challenge your comfort zone. If you're used to working on projects under 10,000, say, and suddenly you're bidding on projects that are 50, 60,000, that can be quite unnerving for a lot of people. And I can quite understand why. And lastly, it requires persistence. This isn't something, as I say, that happens overnight. So if you don't get immediate results from the first big company you go to, or even the second or third, you have to be thick-skinned. You have to go, okay, they didn't need my services, but I'm going to try the next one, the next one, the next one, because it does pay off. So we've got an 8-step process, and what I want to do is take you through the 8 steps very quickly, and then I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on some of those steps and a little less detail on others. So off we go. First of all, it's really important that you know your corporate decision makers, because they are different from small owner operators or the sort of the mom and pop store kind of idea. You need to make a difference. You need to understand how you make that difference and where you make that difference. You need to take your value proposition, and I talked about, we make pretty websites or beautiful websites, and you need to put that into tangible, measurable outcomes. So instead of we make pretty websites, we make websites that convert visitors to buying customers, and have some stats to back that up. You can't just say it. You've got to have tangible evidence that you do it. You need to create a wish list. Who are the top 10 clients you would like to work with? Because you're going to need to do some research, and you need to be focused about who it is you want to work with. Next, we need to do some research, and we need to look for trigger events. And I will be talking significantly more about trigger events later on, because they are key when selling into bigger companies. And then there's a launch sequence, and I call it a launch sequence as much as anything, because this is when the time when you've got to get off your backside and actually get out there, meet people, pick up the phone. You start doing the work. You stop doing the research, and now you're doing the hard graft. That's the hard graft before you start doing all the amazing design work that you do. And you need to start developing business relationships. And a lot of that is the way in which you approach people, being personable, not being too pushy. I've run another webinar which is about sales skills, and one of the things is that you see the more pushy the salesperson is, the less likely the buyer is to buy. So you want to be developing relationships, not targets, even though we think of companies as targets. And lastly comes the crunch. Once you get in there, you've got to make the sale. So I'm going to go through these 8 steps in a bit more detail. So here we go. So the corporate decision makers. So what's the difference? Well, first of all, they're very much more results focused than cost focused. Big difference there. If you are VP of marketing, if you spend $40,000, but you exceed your budget for sales, then you have done a great job. And people don't mind that maybe you spent a little bit more. They don't mind that you've spent 40,000. If you're talking to an entrepreneur or an owner manager and you're asking them to part with $5,000, the back of their mind, they're thinking, $5,000, I could be putting that into my pension. I could be taking my family on vacation. The thought processes are different. One thing with big companies is that you need to break the status quo. You need to move them out of their comfort zone. And the only way of doing that is by having really good tangible evidence that what you're going to do for them is going to work. So there is this need to break the status quo. Most executives in big companies, and I'm sure if you look around amongst your friends, peers, colleagues, they're busy, they're stressed, and they feel pressured. There aren't enough people, there isn't enough time, and often they complain there isn't enough money. So they do have a different set of pressures, and they're also reporting to somebody else who is going to be the person who hires or fires them. With these different series of motivations, you do a great campaign, you do a great project for a VP of marketing, they are then able to show what great work they have done in recruiting you, in hiring you, which gives their pay rise, the annual pay rise or bonus, a much greater chance of taking place. You do a bad job for them and there's a very good chance they'll be fired. So you really don't want to get them into that position. And generally, they are more knowledgeable. I say generally, they tend to have more specialist knowledge in particular areas. And that makes a difference because now you're talking more evenly in technical terms when you're dealing with someone, but not always. The other thing with decision makers in big organizations, and it's a funny old thing. There's a great book called The Challenger Sale, and there's a follow-up one called The Challenger Customer, and they look at selling to big businesses, and they've determined a few years ago that there are on average 5.8 people involved in making decisions in a purchasing position within any big company. So it might be the CEO, the CFO, head of marketing. It might be their personal assistant. So what I want to do is take you through a list of the potential people that could be involved, not necessarily by role, but how they influence the purchasing process. And the first one is the initiator. Who is the person that is actually looking to make change, looking to make something happen? And when you're selling design, primarily you're going to be looking at sales and marketing side, because more often than not, you are creating collateral for sales and marketing. So it might be, usually it will be the sales side. Sorry, usually it will be the marketing side rather than the sales side. Then there's the influencer, and the influencer is the individual who is very persuasive in an organization. Often you find them in fairly senior roles, not necessarily directly related to what it is you're doing. So you might find that influencer is the CEO, the CFO quite often. You then have the decider, and this is who's the person that is going to say yes or no. And again, depending on the size of the project, the size of the budget, often that becomes the CFO or the CEO, who again can be an influencer. But you need to know who is the decider, because you need to make sure you get them in the meetings, because you don't want to have to persuade everybody else and then have the decider turn around and say, yeah, no, we don't have enough information here to make a proper decision. You then have the buyer. And this is the person who you're going to be dealing with, who signs the contract. You're going to have the user. Who are the people who are going to be involved in using what it is you have? If it's marketing material, is it going to be people on the sales side? If it's a website, who is actually going to be using it in-house? How easy is it to maintain? How easy is it to, with a CMS system, for example, how easy is it for them to manage content themselves? You want them on your side. And lastly, and in my experience, one of the most important people to get on side is the gatekeeper. And this is the person who answers the phone, who meets you at reception. And all too often people ignore the gatekeeper. But what I have seen in a number of the big organizations that I work in is the decider will often talk to the gatekeeper and say, well, what did you think of so-and-so? Oh, well, they were okay. Often you see people come in and they kind of ignore the gatekeeper. when they bring them that cup of coffee while they're waiting, they don't say please or thank you. These little decisions that you make in terms of how you treat the gatekeeper flow down through all the other decision makers in the organization, because they will ask their opinion. Is this somebody who is nice to work with? And if the answer is no, then it doesn't matter how much work you do with 1 to 5. If number 6 is like, I can't stand that person, then you're not going to get the project. So really work on understanding who the different people are within the organizations. Bigger businesses might not have all 6. Big corporations definitely will. So on from decision makers to understanding how you make a difference. And this is the worksheet, or the first page of the worksheet. So if you do have it with you, now would be a great time to make your own notes that are relevant to your business. And the first thing is taking a bit of time to do your client analysis. Really important that you understand where you have been successful so far. So what I'd like you to do, not necessarily now, but over the course of the next 48 hours, is actually list out who are the businesses you've had most success with, and then why has that been successful. The flip side of that is which are the businesses we've had least success with, and again look at the reasons why. I'm going to be really mean here, but businesses we've had least success with often, what I have found is people like realtors. And the reason that it's difficult to work with realtors, not always, but more often than not, is that they put their clients' needs first. Which means if you have a meeting set with them and somebody calls up and says, hey, I want to go view a house, you're going to lose that meeting. It can be very time frustrating. They change very quickly. Houses come on and off MLS very quickly. End result is they don't always make very good design clients. Flip side of that is that there are firms that specialize in working with realtors, and they understand how that works, and they charge them a premium, and it works for them. So having come up with a list, short list, long list of where you've had the most success and where you've had the least success, what it's going to indicate is who are the types of businesses we should absolutely avoid, and which are the types of businesses that we should be looking into working with in more detail. And then what type of client do you find the most profitable and the most fun to work with? Now, the handout that I sent out has a little bit more detail and some examples of types of clients. It could be industry type. It could be size of client. The ownership of client. It could be partnerships. Some partnerships are huge. The firm I used to work for, PricewaterhouseCoopers, is I think it's currently the biggest accounting and consulting firm in the world, but up until very, very recently, it was a partnership with tens of thousands of employees. So which type are the most profitable for you, and which type are the most fun to work with? Because you want to have success for your clients, but you want to make money and you want to enjoy working with them. And then just a kind of general question there, what prompts repeat business with them? What are the things that they call you up and say, could you do this for me? Or I need help with this. Think of those things and think of the points in particular where they are complimentary about what it is that you do. So why do they come back to you? Is it because you're on time, on budget, creative, fun to work with? List those things out, because they become more and more important when we're looking at what it is that we can do to help bigger companies. So moving on from what makes a difference to contribution analysis. And this really is just looking in more detail at what it is that you do and really taking that value proposition and turning it into tangible results. So, and this is an area that takes quite a lot of soul searching, to be honest with you, and it's not something that is best done in 5 minutes. Sometimes you need to sit down, you need to make notes. I quite often suggest using whiteboards, and you just fire out short sentences, words, phrases, and then you start to gather these together. So what are the main benefits of working with me? Not me, but you. What are they? Are you fun? Are you intelligent? Are you smart? Are you well read? Do you know the demographics? Do you have expertise? Go through that and create as many ideas as you can, and then start to group those together into coherent phrases, ideally, and then prioritize them. Which are the most important? Which are going to be the most important to big businesses, bigger businesses? Next thing, and again, you've got to be quite self-centered about some of these questions. What problems will a company suffer from not working with me? And you might sort of say, well, if you're very modest, you might say, well, there are lots of other people that do what I can do. That attitude won't get you into working with big companies. You need to be confident. You need to be assumptive. And one of the things you need to be able to do is look at some of these bigger businesses, look at the collateral they're producing, and say, these are specific problems. The branding on their website doesn't match the branding on their Facebook and Twitter feed. Or let's say their Twitter feed doesn't match their Facebook page, which doesn't match their Pinterest, which again doesn't flow through consistently into their website. Or maybe in a retail environment, you see the branding coming across differently. So what problems are they suffering by not working with me? Well, they haven't seen these particular problems that I can see. So what opportunities also is the company missing out on? And to go back to that same example, well, the opportunity they're missing out on is having consistent branding. And that again is really important that they have that. But there are lots of other areas, and this, as I say, really comes down to what it is that you personally are able to bring to the table with each of these companies. And you need to be very sure of this, because this is what you're going to be selling yourself on when you're trying to get your foot in the door with your first big customer or first big client. And it might not be your first one, but maybe we need to do this more consistently rather than first. And lastly, what are the characteristics of businesses that would get the most out of working with me? And again, it might be age of the business, it might be where they operate, it might be the type of business. Maybe they're in the hospitality trade and you have worked your way up, and it was at some point in your life you were a restaurant manager, so you know the business, you know how it works. How can you help them create consistent digital marketing using your experience as a former restaurant manager, for example? So what are the characteristics? Where do you have expertise? Where do you have skills? Where do you have experience? Where do you have life knowledge that you can use and you can leverage to get access into bigger companies? So this is something that I would suggest taking some time over, really almost kind of like brainstorming the whole process, or mind mapping if you use mind maps. I'm a big proponent of mind maps. I love them. So if you were to create a mind map, first of all, around benefits of working with me, secondly, problems, thirdly, opportunities, and fourthly, characteristics, you've got 4 mind maps, and you'll find consistent elements that you'll be able to pull together from those. So some ideas as to how you could go about using this contribution analysis to determine where your strengths and where you deliver most to potential clients. Okay, then we have a target list. Before we actually come up with a top 10 or top 20, we need to think about the characteristics that those particular companies are going to have. And if you work with clients in the business to consumer sector, they will have, or they should have, customer avatars. customer profiles. And what we're doing is we're creating customer profiles, but for companies. So first of all, we want to look at the demographics of the type of companies. Secondly, we want to look at the psychographics. So, what is it that motivates these companies to move forward, to make change? Sorry, excuse me. Do we know what their goals are? Are these things that are written in their annual reports? Are they putting out press releases about certain things? What is it they need to do? Are they introducing new brands? Are they expanding geographically into new market areas? Are they looking to save costs? Not always a great way to move into a new client, but if they're looking to save costs, generally that means they're not selling enough. So how can you help them not save costs, but how can you help them sell more, which is the reverse of the cost saving? It gets them out of the same hole. Think about those psychographic ones, because they become more and more important when you look at the motivations of the individuals involved and the motivations of the organizations. And the other thing is trigger factors. And trigger factors is really something we could run probably a whole webinar on, to be entirely honest. One of the things we're looking for are, what are the signals that a company is now a buyer? Not that they're just looking, but they're now an active buyer. Trigger events are things like acquisitions, they've bought a new business; disposals, they've sold a business. One of the things to look for there is the company that's been disposed of now becomes an active target for you. Have they merged with another organization? Have they had a change of CEO? Have they had a change of VP marketing or CMO, Chief Marketing Officer? Have they very publicly fallen out with their agency of record? All of these things you can have a look for. Read through the trade press. Look, one of the simplest ways of doing it is to have a Google alert for that company. Anytime something comes up, you get an email from Google linking you to the article about what hopefully will be a trigger factor. Follow the company on LinkedIn. Look at changes. Are they recruiting? Are they hiring and firing? Is there significant staff turnover within an organization? All of these become trigger factors. And the more time you invest in understanding how trigger factors work, the easier it becomes to get somebody who is now an active buyer, rather than somebody who sits on the back burner and says, we'll bear you in mind, we'll put you on file, we'll come to you when we're ready. What you want is to find as many bigger companies that are ready to buy from you. So from that, what we want to do is create a top 10 list. Just very briefly, basics: name of the company, obviously, contact details if you have them, something about the demographics, the reason that they're a good fit, and what trigger factors either you have seen or that you would like to look out for. Now, I call this a top 10. In reality, it's an ever-changing list, because as you go through and target some of these clients actively in the launch sequence, so to speak, some of them will drop off that list, because as you do your research, let's say you're a web developer, you get on there and you look at it and you go, oh, wow, they just got a brand new site. They're not in the market for a new site. Do they fall off the list? Maybe, but are there any other things that you can offer them that would make a significant difference? Let's say you are particularly adept at social media marketing, or SEM, search engine marketing. Can you help them leverage their new investment in their website by creating great digital marketing policies for them, plans for them, strategies for them, and helping them implement it? Because that, again, could be a very good way of generating an in to work with that company. This list, as I say, is pretty much forever changing. And as one company falls off the list, another one should be added. Sorry, excuse me. So enough for the moment of a top 10 target list. Research and triggers, a little bit more on research and triggers and where I like to find out more about clients. So really know your client. Obviously, you know the first place to start is Google. Both look at the web pages, but also look at Google News. See if there's anything coming up there that is relevant. Sorry, excuse me, got a frog in my throat there. Within knowing the client, obviously, you'll be looking at their websites, you'll be looking at LinkedIn profiles, you'll be looking at the major people that you believe will be involved in any decision making. It's also important to understand their industry. If we use the hospitality industry, for example, targeting them in February is not a great time unless they are in the tourist sector. But if they're just hospitality, busiest time of year is December, and the busiest single day is Valentine's Day. So if you go and target them at the beginning of February, you've left it too late. So you need to know the cycles of the industry. Real estate is a great example there. Understand as well what their particular roles are, because it's going to be different if it's a buyer, if it's the owner of a business, or if it's just an employee of the company. What are their motivations? If you're doing your research and you look at the VP of marketing and you think, yeah, okay, the VP of marketing is going to be the buyer in this situation. What is it that motivates them? What are the things that keep them awake at night? And that's a very hackneyed and cliched way of looking at it. Oh, what keeps you awake at night? Well, pretty much nothing keeps me awake at night. I sleep like a log, but it doesn't mean that I don't have things that I need to be considering. So what are the things that they should be considering in their role? What's important to them as a buyer, as an employee, somebody using the system, using the processes, using the collateral that you're creating, versus the owner. And the owner in this case may well be the owner's representative, in other words, the CEO, the CFO, somebody at the executive level. Try and create a buyer persona, and it is a little more difficult when you're working with bigger companies, but who are the key people within these businesses? What are the things that make them tick? What are their both demographics and their psychographics? So if you were to look at the VP of marketing, let's say demographics, female, 35, graduate, and earning $70,000 a year. What are the psychographics there? They want career advancement. They want to make good decisions. They want to be liked. They want to be successful. They want to move up within the organization. These are all just examples. All of which are very relevant, because when you're talking to that particular individual, so one of those 6 in the decision-making chain, you may be using different ways of communicating with different members within that group. Something to bear in mind. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, very little more detail, when I talk about communication sequences, and that is something that's coming up very shortly. It's also important that you talk the buyer's language, so that if you are in a technical environment, you're able to understand what they are talking about. But at the same time, you don't want to be making sure they're talking your language. If you're talking about design, you're saying, oh, we use the latest Adobe InDesign suite, and then it can do this and that and that. They're not interested. They want to know you can get the job done. It's a little like when someone comes around to paint your house. You don't need to know that they're using a 4-inch nylon brush versus a roller. You just want it to look fantastic. So launch sequences. So this is where we get down to the nitty-gritty and get working. So I'm going to quickly go through this. First one is we want to qualify our leads, because not everybody in that top 10 will in fact be a good fit. And some of them we may look at and go, No, timing doesn't work. No, they don't have the financial resources. You may see that, and I've seen this recently with one of my clients, that one of their major clients was going through some financial difficulty. So we knew at that point that there was no real incentive to keep them in that top 10 list. We'll put them on the back burner because they're a big company, they'll bounce back. But in the short term, they're cutting all their sales, or all their marketing budget, I should say, not necessarily sales budget. So qualify those leads. Focus on the best of them. Then we need to identify the individuals that are involved. How are we going to reach out to these people? How are we going to connect with them? And one of the key things there is the power of networking, and that is both social networking and face-to-face networking. Are you connected with any of these individuals on LinkedIn? Can you connect with people who are connected with them? Can you get an introduction? Networking is huge. One of my clients, and I will say they're not in the design sector, uses face-to-face networking and referral almost exclusively. And their business has grown from 25,000 a month. And 4 years on, they had their first $1 million month. Quite a spectacular growth rate. But they use networking, so don't discount that face-to-face networking. It can be really important. What social connections do you have? What social connections do your friends, your family, your former college roommates, people that you know well? Is there anyone that can introduce you to somebody who can introduce you to the right person? Then you need to go on the offensive, and this is interruptive marketing. And a lot of people are very wary about that. And certainly, if you look at the advertising on LinkedIn and on Facebook, it's like, never cold call again. Well, yeah. The reality is, when you're dealing with business to business, you need to make that personal connection. And that can be connecting on Twitter. It can be private message on Twitter. You're making that social connection. You're asking questions. And I've seen this work very effectively. But more often than not, it is a letter, it's a follow-up phone call, and it's a piece of substantial evidence that you can do what you say you're going to do. A great case study, some good testimonials that are relevant to the potential client you're talking to. So it's important that we craft a communication sequence so that it's going to have an impact. It's going to make people step back and go, well, this is unusual. And it can be something, I've seen things like recorded delivery mail, so that somebody has to sign for it. And they think, oh, this must be important. They open it up. Wow, what is it? Maybe it's a brand booklet. Maybe it's a case study. It's something that is going to get them to go, oh, wow, somebody thought this was really important. I should have a look, because they invested $5 in sending it. Then what's the next step? Looking for little yeses in every step of that communication sequence. Yes, they opened it. Yes, they read it. Yes, they take your phone call, 2-minute phone call. Yes, they agreed to a follow-up phone call. Yes, they agreed to a follow-up meeting. All of these little steps, you craft this communication sequence, and it can be different for different companies. So you need to have a number of them. It's a bit like having a number of different sales funnels, if you like. And in that context, it's no different. You're looking at little yeses all the way down until eventually you get the big yeses, then signing the contract. Okay, so that's a launch sequence. In terms of design decisions, and this is something that small firms kind of work their way up the ladder, if you like, or up the steps. Number of different phases here. So we've got 5 of them. Unintentional design is somebody says, hey, we need a form for this. Can you knock it up on Word? Self-design is where we have these wonderful products like Canva, and I'm sure, Wix and Squarespace, and we all kind of tear our hair in dismay when we look at them, because they look amateur, they are amateur, and they really don't work very well. And then we get genius design, and this is really where you should be stepping in. This should be the first phase that you're at. This is where you're coming in and saying, I have experience in doing this. I've done it before. I can help you. And then we get to activity-focused design. So, what is the intention of this? How do we make this work? And we work backwards. And the last one is very much experience-focused design. And this is in some ways less relevant, so I'm not going to go into detail. But it's looking at what do we want the end user, UX design, if you like. What do we want the end user to be feeling when they're doing this? And then you design backwards to make that feeling happen. But as you go through the more complex design phases, so the length of your sales cycle increases. So my suggestion is always to jump in at the genius design stage, and which is why we did the contribution analysis, because what you want to be able to say is, this is the contribution I can give. I'm at the genius design phase. It's slightly longer than kind of you guys doing it yourself, but it's well worthwhile. Okay. Developing relationships, and I have talked a little bit about this. Things to remember, really you're doing this in the long term. This is not something that you're looking to develop a short-term relationship and move on. An example there, short-term relationship would be working with an entrepreneur. They want you to help them create their brand, their logo, their website, and some marketing collateral, and then they're gone. They move on. This is different. These are companies that are going to be around for a long time, you hope, and you're going to help them become more successful. So you have to have consistent engagement. And one of the things that we can do here is look at this communication sequence and what's the spacing of the communication? How often should we be in touch with these individuals? What should we be sending them? What's relevant? Do we find interesting articles and we think, oh, so-and-so would like that. It's relevant to them. Maybe it's in the newspaper. Maybe it's in a magazine. I read Dwell and the Modern Architecture magazine, and I often find really interesting articles in there which are much more about design in general than about housing in particular. And I quite often fire those off to prospective clients or even my own clients saying, hey, I thought you might find this interesting. It keeps you top of mind. Are there books they might find interesting? Either buy the book and send it to them if you're feeling extremely generous, or maybe you suggest they get it. Maybe you send a link to a book review and say, hey, I read this book review and thought this might be something that would be relevant for you. Is there something that's going to make them laugh? There are so many cartoons that come out in the design sector that not using cartoons is almost criminal, because if you can make people laugh, they're going to remember you. What about interesting stuff? Do you come across a snippet of research, competitor news? They may already have it, but it shows you're thinking about them. So, for example, in the news yesterday was the fact that IKEA is looking to expand within Canada. Well, if you work for a furniture manufacturer or a furniture warehouse, is this something that you would want to let them know about? Maybe they've seen it, maybe they haven't, but it's like, I saw this, thought of you, we need to come up with a plan to deal with this. What happens if IKEA moves into your neighborhood? And lastly, we come to the crunch. So this is the sales meeting. So what happens? What do you need to do when you get in there? And I'll be honest with you, this is, again, something that could take weeks of training, but this is very much an overview. So things to remember, that it's not about you, that it really is about the client. So you need to be really well briefed when you get in there. And as I say, it's not about your particular skills, your techniques. It is about how you can help them. Talk about them, not about you. Focus on solving very specific problems that you either have identified or you believe are problems. It could be that you've seen a new trend that other companies are doing a certain form of packaging design, for example. Maybe they're moving to recyclable packaging. If you look at the toy industry, for example, they could desperately do with some help on creating recyclable packaging. Well, what happens if Mattel suddenly moves into that marketplace and is now becoming much more environmentally conscious? If you work with a toy manufacturer, you need to be on the case. You need to be able to say, hey, this is what one of the market leaders is doing. We need to be doing something similar or even further ahead. So focus on solving problems for them. And then identify how you are making a specific difference. And this again comes back to the idea of the contribution analysis and what it is that you do, how you deliver. Case studies are great, but when you get into the sales meeting, no one's going to want to read a case study, but it's always good to have some hard, cold stats that you can present. Ask questions. Really important, and it sounds odd, but to sound like a consultant means that you sound knowledgeable. So ask them about things. So have you thought of X, Y, or Z? So when you're doing this, what's the process that you use? Have you found? And if you're at a loss as to what kind of questions you should ask, there is a fantastic book called, sorry, I'm just going to grab it off my bookshelf. Fantastic book called Making Questions Work by Dorothy Strachan. Highly recommend it if you are in any doubt about what kind of questions you should be asking. Lots of great examples, really good. And it's really key that you identify and ask for the logical next step. So if, for example, you get that you've done your letter and you've now made that phone call and you get the person you want to speak to on the phone, ask for the next logical step. The next logical step is a longer phone call, for example. Could I take 15-20 minutes of your time to run through? Could I meet with you over coffee to run through? So you're looking for a small step up, and it has to be the next logical step. It can't suddenly be, oh, I've got this 2-minute phone call. I'd like you to get the CEO, the CFO, the CMO all together, and I'd like to do a 2-hour presentation on how we can turn your business around. That is not a logical next step, and it's way too big a step. So identify what that step could look like and ask for it, because if you don't ask for it, they won't necessarily suggest it. And that's the key. You're in the position to close on the next stage in the sequence. Ask for it. Okay. When it comes to the sales meeting itself, I cannot emphasize enough the need to plan sales meetings out properly. The 6 Ps, basically. Prior planning prevents piss poor performance. You've probably all heard it before, but it's a truism. It's very relevant. So things to bear in mind. Have checklists. Make sure that if you're driving to a client, you know exactly where they are. You've looked at Google Maps and you know how long it's going to take you. You're leaving an extra 20 minutes. Much better to be sitting in reception for 20 minutes waiting, having a cup of coffee, chatting with the gatekeeper, getting to know them, reading through some of the other literature they might have there. It will give you an idea about what the company is like. Those checklists. Do you have a projector? Do you have the cables to plug it into your Mac? There's nothing more embarrassing than getting there and going, oops, I forgot the cable. You know, and then you have 6 people huddled around the screen on your MacBook. Boy, you know, you're not impressive when that happens. So have checklists and use them. I've put scripts there. Script is maybe too strong a term. What I like to do is to have walked through what you would like the meeting to look like, what it is that you're going to say. And it may be that instead of having scripts, you have bullet points that you make notes of for yourself. I know I want to cover these 3 points. Then I'm looking for an answer. What do you want that meeting to look like? And one of the things I often say with my prospective clients is that we're going to do a consultation. It's going to last about an hour. It's going to be broken down into 3 phases. Bang. You've set the scene. You can do exactly the same when you go into a bigger client. And now you're controlling the meeting rather than the meeting controlling you. And practice, 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 practice. Run through your presentation. Make sure it works. Make sure it works. Have a backup plan. Have a second computer there to make sure. Have a second Mac, even if it's your iPad. Make sure you have the backup. Make sure it works. Make sure you know exactly how you want things to run. It's also really important to measure success and feed that back into the meeting itself. If you make a suggestion about something, how does it go down? When you look around the room, don't be so focused on your bit of paper that you're not looking up, or so focused on your screen you're not looking up. What are people's, what is their body language saying? Are they bored? If they're bored, then you need to move on. You need to up the pace. You need to start getting relevant because you're wasting their time. So measure the success of how the meeting is going and use that to feed back into the meeting itself. Okay. And it's really important when you're selling against other design firms that you become the differentiator. Always remember the buyer has so many options. Something like 60% of the buying process has already taken place before a buyer suggests they're interested in even talking to you. They've done their research. They've looked at options. They've looked at possibilities. There are many really, really good designers out there who, unfortunately, are not necessarily great business people. And some of those good designers, much like the startup businesses, they're not around for very long because they don't make any money doing what they do. But they do great design one-off. And then they realize they're not making any money and they've got to go back to working with somebody else, or for somebody else, I should say. Never, ever, ever use price as the differentiator. It has to be about you and what you deliver. As soon as you start negotiating on price and moving down, you're moving into a downward spiral. When a buyer, and some of them will say, oh, well, that's interesting because, we also had a quote for 20,000, but you're at 38,000, so you're way more expensive. Don't suddenly think, oh, heart in mouth, we can match it. Nightmare, absolute nightmare. Be firm, be prepared to justify why yours is 38, because you are delivering results. You're not a flash in the pan. You're not a one-off. You're not a good designer who's going to do the work and go out of business. You're going to be around. You're going to be there for the long haul. You're building a long-term relationship with the client. So don't use price as the differentiator. Otherwise, you go down into the commodity market and you might as well say, oh, guys, tell you what, I'll send you the link to Canva. I'll send you the link to Wix or Squarespace. Pablo is another online graphic design program. You don't want to head down into that Fiverr, Elance route. Nightmare, nightmare, nightmare. So become an expert, because that will really help you stand out. An expert in your specific field in the design world, but also demonstrate your expertise within their industry, their geographic location. Use all the competitive advantage you have, your experience, your life experience, the fact that you work with a team. Hopefully you work with a team, even if you don't, that you have resources that you can call upon. Use those to your advantage to stand out. Okay. So, quick synopsis. Sorry, we've overrun by a minute or so. So, quick synopsis here. 10 things to do. Target top 10 companies. Make sure you do your research. Slow down. Don't rush into this too quickly. Go for limited options first of all. Look to do a small project with them. Often big agencies aren't interested in doing a small flyer, for example. It's not very exciting. Or invitations to a launch. One of my clients did that, and they have moved on from creating 300 really beautiful, sexy invitations to the opening of a new location, to do even more work with that client. But initially, 300 invitations? Is it worth doing? They got a foot in the door with a multinational corporation by doing that. Target multiple entry points, and that comes back to the list of 6 potential influencers or buyers within big organizations. Talked about being assumptive, be more like a consultant. Some of you are probably listening to me and thinking, God, the last thing I want to do is be like him. But it works when you're going in and you're working with bigger companies. Plan in advance. Do it. Be the differentiator. Demonstrate your personal expertise. Show how you are the person that really makes the difference. Okay. What I want to do very quickly before we move on to the Q&A is I just want to quickly talk to you about one of the 2 lines of business that I operate in with design firms, and it's business coaching. One of the things working with an experienced coach is that we can help you achieve your potential. And this is not me specifically, because there are a number of coaches out there who can do this. We act as a guide. More often than not, we've had multiple clients in the past who have been through, if not exactly the same experience you're going through, certainly very similar experiences. So we know what works and for the most part what doesn't. We have resources available to call upon that can help you with your business, whether that is educational resources. One of the things I do is I always make sure that I have a group of people that I work with that can help fill in the gaps when I don't know something. And I would much rather say I don't know, but I know someone who does, than make something up as we go along. It provides you with accountability, especially if you run your own business. Who are you accountable to? Well, you don't want to be accountable to your partner or to your spouse. That's absolutely no fun at all. Well, dear, did you get this, and this done? That makes for fun conversation in an evening. But with your business coach, I have absolutely no trouble giving you a call bright and early on a Tuesday morning and say, okay, so that stuff you were going to do on Monday, have you done it? Why haven't you done it? Okay, well, we're going to have to do it. And lastly, acting as an impartial sounding board, you will have ideas. You will have things you want to do. And to be honest, if you ask your mum, she's either going to say, that's the best idea ever, or she's going to go, ooh, that sounds risky to me. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Likewise, friends will almost invariably say, yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. If it's a crap idea, I'll tell you it's a crap idea. That's what I'm there for. I'm not paid to be your friend. I'm not paid to reflect glory. I'm there to help you grow your business, to make changes in your business. So in order to do that, I charge $1,250 per month for standard contract. However, I'm feeling particularly generous today. So what I want to offer is instead of $1,250 a month, $1,000 per month for the first 3 months. And the important thing to note is there is no minimum number of months. I'm not tying you in for a year's contract. The majority of my clients do work with me for over 12 months, just so you know. And certainly further down the line, we look at whether you need the full $1,250 per month or whether we can cut back on the amount of interaction we have. I want to make this available to you until tomorrow lunchtime. You've been kind enough to give me an hour plus of your time. I want to reciprocate by giving something back to you. I value your time. And so I want to make this offer now. As I say, it stands till 12. That doesn't mean you have to sign up with me. What it means is you have to express interest, and that can be as simple as an email. And we would then arrange a consultation to see whether we're a good fit. because I need to ensure that we are a good fit. Otherwise, I'm taking your money under false pretenses if I don't think that you are capable of getting real value out of our engagement. So that said, I want to move on to Q&A.